This morning, Denmark's Prime Minister has praised the people of Greenland for their resilience amid mounting pressure from the Trump administration to take control of the semi-autonomous Danish territory.
And the world needs us to have Greenland, including Denmark. Denmark has to have us have Greenland.
A U.S. president once said, "We're going to get Greenland, one way or another." The world laughed at the idea. A frozen island with more ice than people. Why would America even want it? But behind the icy landscapes lies a resource war that could reshape global power, rare earth metals, oil reserves, strategic radar gaps. Suddenly, Greenland isn't just frozen wilderness, it's the chessboard where superpowers are making their boldest moves. Here's the twist. While headlines focused on Donald Trump's dramatic claim to annex Greenland, another country was already moving in silence. And it wasn't Russia. It wasn't China. It was America's quiet neighbor to the North, Canada. In late 2024, while Washington debated and postured, Canada pulled off a $3 billion deal with Greenland and the European Union. No military threats, no loud speeches, just contracts, investment funds, and agreements too valuable to ignore. By the time Trump stepped back onto the world stage after reclaiming the presidency, the game board had already shifted. So why does this matter? Because Greenland is more than a patch of ice. It's a treasure chest. Underneath the glaciers sit nearly 38 billion tons of rare earth elements like niobium, graphite, and zirconium, the building blocks for modern tech, electric cars, and even advanced weapons. Add 17 billion barrels of oil, and you begin to see why this icy island became the obsession of global leaders. And here's where things get tense. Trump wasn't just reviving old ambitions. According to insiders, his National Security Council dusted off Cold War documents, plans from Eisenhower's era, and radar strategies from the 1980s. The goal, closing the Arctic gap and ensuring U.S. dominance in the far north. But there was a problem. Greenland wasn't listening. Its leaders, backed by Denmark and the EU, fired back with a clear message. Greenland belongs to its people, and it is not for sale. Canada, meanwhile, was already securing mining licenses and shipping agreements that positioned Europe, not America, at the center of the Arctic's future. So what happens when a superpower insists on control, but finds itself outplayed on its own doorstep? By early 2025, the tension was undeniable. Donald Trump, newly back in the White House, no longer spoke about Greenland as a business deal. In front of Congress, his rhetoric sharpened. This wasn't about access, it was about control. Behind closed doors, Pentagon officials raised alarms. Greenland's northern coast created what they called a blind zone, a stretch of icy waters where Russian submarines could slip past radar detection. For us defense leaders, this wasn't just about minerals. It was about national security. But here's the twist. While Washington turned the Arctic into a military concern, Greenland's leaders saw Trump's approach as tone-deaf and disrespectful. One Greenlandic official put it bluntly, "We are not a prize to be auctioned off." Denmark's prime minister echoed the sentiment, warning that any aggressive U.S. move could fracture NATO itself. Canada's quiet maneuvers only deepened the divide. Greenland Resources, a Canadian mining company, secured a 30-year license to extract molybdenum, a rare metal critical for high-strength steel. Backed by European investment banks and Denmark's credit agencies, shipments were already mapped out for European steel markets. Washington, completely sidelined. Another Canadian firm, Amarok Minerals, reopened a massive gold deposit with funding not just from Europe, but from private investors in the U.S. itself. Ironically, American money was helping Canada build Greenland's mining future, while Trump's administration struggled to even get a seat at the table. And Europe wasn't just investing, it was protecting its stake. France dispatched a nuclear submarine to patrol Baffin Bay. Norway publicly backed Denmark. Even Germany, desperate to reduce dependence on U.S. gas, poured support into Arctic projects that could reshape Europe's energy future. For Washington, this wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. Molybdenum, gold, rare earths, these weren't just resources. They were the backbone of America's clean energy ambitions, its defense systems, even its hypersonic missile program. When companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon started facing shortages, the alarms rang louder. The Arctic was no longer just a frozen frontier. It was becoming a stage where America's dominance could slip, not because of Russia or China, but because of Canada and Europe. So how does a superpower respond when it feels cornered in a game it thought it was winning? By spring of 2025, Washington's frustration had turned into something bigger: isolation. NATO allies, once expected to follow America's lead, were quietly choosing sides. Norway stood firmly with Denmark, warning that U.S. annexation talk threatened the very fabric of the alliance. Poland kept silent, unwilling to upset Washington but equally cautious about backing Trump's Arctic campaign. And then came France, sending a chilling message with its submarine patrols and a multi-million-dollar fund to develop Greenland's first modern airport. Europe wasn't just investing, it was staking a claim. Meanwhile, inside the United States, opposition to Trump's Arctic push grew louder. Senator Josh Hawley argued that America had to act fast or risk losing Greenland to China, framing the crisis as a battle for national survival. But others Others weren't convinced. Alaska's Senator Lisa Murkowski warned that militarizing the Arctic could devastate fragile ecosystems and fracture alliances beyond repair. Democratic lawmakers floated a different vision altogether. Collaborative mining agreements, environmental safeguards, and shared benefits with Greenland and Denmark. But Trump's team pressed harder. At the Pentagon, rare earth shortages were no longer theoretical. Defense contractors scrambled as supply chains cracked. Lockheed Martin postponed hypersonic missile tests. Raytheon sought emergency suppliers in Australia and Chile. The clean sector, fueled by Biden-era incentives, suddenly faced material shortages that threatened to derail entire projects. And here's the irony that caught Washington off guard. While U.S. officials painted Canada as a quiet spoiler, American investors were profiting from the very projects undermining U.S. influence. Money from Wall Street flowed into Greenland's gold and mineral deals, fueling the Canadian-EU alliance that Trump's administration was trying to block. The deeper problem: Washington was fighting yesterday's battle. Trump's speeches focused on ownership, sovereignty, and annexation. But the new Arctic game wasn't about flags and borders. It was about supply chains, financing, and long-term partnerships. Areas where Canada and Europe were already 2 steps ahead. And as these cracks widened, a dangerous question emerged. If America couldn't hold its ground in Greenland, what did that mean for its role as the world's dominant power? As the summer of 2025 unfolded, the Arctic no longer looked like a frozen backwater. It looked like the center of a new world order. Energy was driving the shift. A Canadian firm, Cedar Energy, announced plans for a floating liquefied natural gas plant off Greenland's coast, targeting European buyers. The timing was explosive, with U.S. gas exports facing new restrictions under Trump's administration. Germany and other EU states saw Canada's Arctic project as a lifeline. Less dependence on Russian gas, less dependence on America, more leverage for Europe. Greenland, once dismissed as a colony in the shadows of Denmark, was suddenly writing its own future. Revenues from molybdenum and gold poured into its national fund, while byproducts like silver and copper supported the EU's clean hydrogen push for the first time. Greenland wasn't just surviving, it was building economic autonomy. Washington's response: pressure. The State Department scrambled to negotiate joint development rights with Denmark and Greenland, but the talks collapsed. Copenhagen and Nuuk issued a blunt rejection. Sovereignty was not for sale, not for lease, not for negotiation. The more Washington pushed, the more it looked desperate. Meanwhile, Canada expanded what national outlets dubbed the Arctic Hexagon, a strategy linking mining hubs across Baffin Island and Greenland with new ports, airstrips, and even space cooperation. Projects with NASA. On paper, it looked like cooperation. In practice, it gave Canada and its European partners control over the infrastructure America needed most. Every move added pressure to Washington. Defense leaders warned of vulnerabilities. Energy companies faced shortages. Allies stopped taking U.S. assurances at face value. And still, Trump doubled down, repeating his claim that Greenland was essential for America's survival. But here's the question haunting Washington insiders: had the U.S. already lost the Arctic race before it even began? By late 2025, the Arctic's power map looked nothing like it had a decade earlier. Greenland, still within the Danish kingdom, was no longer a passive territory. It was a player. Its mining revenues flowed into a sovereign wealth fund, its deals tied directly to Europe's industrial future, and its partnerships gave it leverage that even Washington couldn't ignore. For Canada, the gamble paid off. Its companies weren't just mining Greenland soil, they were reshaping the Arctic supply chain. With EU financing and Nordic partnerships, Canada positioned itself as a stabilizer between 2 restless giants, the US and China. Every barrel of Arctic oil and every ton of rare earth metals pulled Greenland closer to Ottawa and Brussels, and further from Washington. The U.S., meanwhile, found itself boxed in. Trump's speeches about annexation may have stirred headlines, but they alienated allies. His administration's push for a minerals-first strategy collapsed under the weight of broken negotiations and diplomatic pushback. By the time defense contractors felt the sting of shortages, Greenland's ore was already committed to Europe. Even NATO felt the strain. While no ally formally broke ranks, quiet fractures appeared. Norway and Denmark grew wary of U.S. pressure. France asserted its independence, and Germany leaned on Canadian LNG to reduce its reliance on American energy. In the shadows of these moves, China watched carefully, waiting for its own chance to step into the Arctic equation. But here's the real twist. America wasn't defeated by Russia or Beijing. It was undercut by Canada, Europe, and even its own investors who bet on Greenland's future. The superpower that once dictated terms now looked like it was chasing the game, and so the Arctic entered a new era, one defined not by military bases and borders, but by contracts, supply chains, and alliances that reshaped global power. The question now is simple, but unsettling. If America can be pushed to the sidelines in Greenland, where else could its dominance unravel? What's your take on this Arctic shift? Is it the start of a new balance of power, or just another chapter in a much bigger story? Drop your thoughts below, and if you're following this series, stay tuned, because the next front might be closer than anyone expects.